So hello and welcome to our first edition of IDM Democracy Talks. My name is Silvia NADJIVAN and I'm Deputy Managing Director of the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe, IDM. And we are talking now in the frame of our Jean Monnet project. It's headed by Dr. Busek in cooperation with the Danube Rectors Conference and supported by the Erasmus program. And the title of our project is From Fictional to Functioning Democracy, Developing Concepts and Strategies for Strengthening the European Union in Inclusiveness. And the date we have chosen for this first edition of the IDM Democracy Talks is selected now because we are now in the frame of the Erasmus days, and symbolically we also chose this day and this date for talking on democracy, because the actual political and social situation in Europe and abroad has shown us that liberal democracy cannot be taken for granted, but has to be renewed each day. And we all have to be aware that it's our personal individual engagement for democracy, and just to analyze, and not only to analyze, but also to offer also concepts and visions for the future development of democracy first of all in Europe and also abroad. And we have invited, so the plan is also to talk with experts. As we can see now, we have invited guests. This is also the main idea of this series, from the political, science, civil sector, as well as from the educational sector and cultural one. And the idea is to talk together with our experts on the current situation, and not only to analyze the problems, but also to commonly develop new forms and new participation forms and representation forms. So we are now entering also the topic of our first edition of the IDM Democracy Talks. It's participation and representation. And for that, I very much appreciate to welcome our guests, experts from Austria and Serbia and Montenegro. And I would like to welcome Snezana ĐAPIĆ. She's project manager at the Bureau for Social Research, BIRODI in Belgrade. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Our second guest is Monika MOKRE. She's head of research at the Department of Cultural Studies and Theater History at the Austrian Academy of Science in Vienna. So thank you for discussing with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
And our third guest is Marko PEJOVIĆ. He is program manager at the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Podgorica. So thank you also for coming and joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So in this first edition of IDM Democracy Talks, Participation and Representation, we discuss two fundamental elements and pillars of democracy. It's participation, and democracy, of course, requires participation of its citizens for its functionality and legitimacy. And on the other hand, participants or citizens have to be represented by the elected authorities and decision makers and their policies. But what we can see, the social reality shows different problems. So with factors such as migration, political apathy, and also immanent system critique against the background of state capture and nepotism, we can see that authorities do not appropriately represent the local population of one country or region. So we just picked it up to discuss from the theoretical point actual developments, and just to find what can be done now. And as our starting point are the Viennese elections. We had them on October, now the 11th, and the elections showed that also as you, Monika, have found out in your research, and we have also the statistical data, that 1/3 of the population in Vienna has not the right to vote. And this is the main background and the main basis also for your project, Monika. If no vote, at least voice, which you are heading and also realizing together with the political scientist Tamara is. And I would like to ask you, when you're talking about voice and voices as a other kind of participation, what do you mean by these voices?
Well, yes, I mean, this differentiation works very well, I think, in English, so because in German it would be the same word, but you have not really a say in the elections, but obviously still you can talk about things, even when you are not allowed to vote. On the other hand, saying that also this is limited. So also your participation in the public sphere as a non-EU citizen at least is limited. So for instance, you are not allowed to register a demonstration, which I think is in itself problematic, because I always think the public sphere could be really open for everybody to contribute, and also for every kind of content to be included. So now with this very well-known figure that we have 30% of the population in Vienna who is not allowed to vote on the Viennese level, we started our project. Now we have to differentiate a bit, because we have EU citizens here, and they are allowed to vote on the district level, but not on the level of Vienna. And we have third country nationals who are not allowed to vote at all. This is a specific situation in Vienna, because in principle, according to the Treaty of the European Union, every EU citizen should be allowed to vote in the community, in the city where he or she lives. But as Vienna is not only a city, but also a province, for Vienna, this is not valid. So this is a specific problem. So this means we have about 16% third country nationals, 14% EU citizens who are not allowed to vote, a third of the population. And what we wanted to do in our project is to at least give these people a voice, or to enable them to talk about their political positions and to pose questions out of these positions to the political parties. And we tried to do that in a deliberative setting. And this in itself is also, I think, interesting, so that you find ways to deal with democracy which are not limited just to put a cross somewhere, but say, let's talk about things, and let's also see if we can get to some kind of consensus or compromise, even in cases where we are of different opinions. So I think this is a very important part of democracy, that we need democracy, or we need a political system, because we have conflicts. If we were all of the same opinion, we wouldn't need that. But how to deal with conflicts, I think this is a special part of democracy which is frequently neglected, and we're just talking about voting. So in this deliberative setting, questions should be developed to the political parties. And then we used a tool which is used in Austria for checking how your preferences agree with the preferences of political parties. It's called Wahlkabine. It's very usual also in other countries. So it's an online tool. You have some questions, you give your answers, and then you see which party answered similarly to yours. And these questions normally are developed by researchers, by academics and journalists. And in our format, the people not allowed to vote developed these questions. We discussed them with other researchers and journalists and put them online. They are now online, so everybody can now see if this, how they agree with the political parties, but also if these questions seem relevant to them, voters or not voters who are using that. So this is the point. This is roughly the project. I have to add to that, as everybody else, we had a huge problem due to the COVID crisis, so it was not really possible to meet up for quite some time at the time when we wanted to meet up with people. So we had one meeting after that, and in between we tried to compensate by talking at the phone with people, by sending out questionnaires and whatever. And this is another, I think, interesting side result of this project, how this is then limiting every form of democratic participation, especially with people who maybe do not have high education, are not as used to work via Zoom as we are nowadays, unfortunately, or not. Yeah. And this said, maybe one last remark to that, the fact that these people are not allowed to vote does not only mean that migrants are not represented and that politicians don't have an incentive to react to the interests and needs of migrants. It also leads to other forms of biases. So migrants in Vienna are usually younger than the population with Austrian citizenship, and frequently also they have less income and also less education. So you get other biases among the population due to the fact that 30% are excluded.
And may I ask, how did you get to the migrants you asked? Was it according to which data you had the possibility to contact them?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing was obviously that we consulted statistics and looked according to some dimensions like gender, age, education, income, also which district they're living in. So we checked out what would our ideal group be representing these different dimensions. And then we sent out calls via different channels. I mean, I myself, I have a lot to do with this refugees, asylum seekers, so I have my channels there. We had very great support by an online magazine, which is explicitly addressing expats. We spread it over friends, neighbors, whatever. And then we came to a very usual outcome, namely that the people who were really interested were higher educated and possibly also with high income, not necessarily, but higher educated, also rather a bit older than we needed, mostly female. And then we really started up to do it step by step. I mean, for instance, a friend of mine who is originally from Bosnia and she's a politician in one of the Viennese districts, she went to one of her coffee houses, personally talking with people and saying, please go there and talk with them. The problem here is obviously not that people are not able to talk about politics. I mean, this everybody is, I guess, but that they are afraid to do so. So it was also for Silvia, for my friend, it was really hard to convince people that they will not embarrass themselves or whatever in such a round. And this is, I mean, again, I think we see also a more general problem of democracy. We know that people with higher education and higher income are overrepresented also in our election results. And this is something which it's not exclusively with regard to migrants. It's generally that there is also this idea that you have to be very well educated to do that. And I think in a way it's also emphasized by politics when it is frequently said, okay, but this is a question for experts, right? So, I mean, this is too difficult for the citizens. This is not a very good incentive for me as a citizen to participate if I'm bluntly said that I'm not able to do so.
And did you then reach those people who were out of the bias, which you meant that they were afraid? Did you even reach some individuals?
Partly, yeah, partly. I mean, to be honest, the representation was not perfect, but it was okay. But this really had to do with personal contacts. I mean, one of the guys who was really very interesting in the discussion. I mean, I met him because he's an asylum seeker and his brother had problems and we worked on that. So because we knew each other, I could tell him, come on, you can do that. I know it. We've talked enough. So it's not easy. And then if you imagine now on like a larger scale, I mean, then it's difficult to do that. But this is really a usual problem of deliberative democracy. I mean, one thing we also did, which I think is important, we paid for the time. And I think this is, obviously we paid for everybody. So we said, okay, for these hours, we pay, I don't know, I can't remember, 200 euros maybe. But for those people who really need all their time to make their living and who cannot talk like me during the working time in such a setting, I think this also makes a difference.
And it was in Vienna during the Viennese elections, so it was not the appropriate, so to say, appropriate representation of immigrants, if we can say that, but 1/3, as we now found out, but also political apathy. And what we could observe is that the right populist party, the Freedom Party, FPÖ, lost their voters. So it turned out sank about 10%. And what do you think, Monika, could be done to reach those people who are just frustrated? And this is political frustration.
Yes, sure. I mean, I saw a graph by a colleague and friend of mine, Gerd Walchers, where you can see the largest group of the population in Vienna are those who are not allowed to vote. The second largest is the one who did not go to voting. And this were also like 24%. So we have like 54% who are not represented now. We have a minority government, whatever is happening now in terms of coalition. So this is a real problem. I think on the one hand, I mean, you mentioned the FPÖ, and we had this huge scandal of the FPÖ. Things like that obviously frustrate people. And I would imagine that many people who really voted for FPÖ are now frustrated and say, okay, what is going on here? I mean, this is ridiculous, this is embarrassing. They obviously do not care about the people, these people that we are voting for. I think another issue is really also that I think more and more, as I said before, it is conveyed by politics. This is something for experts. This is something you do not understand. The form of political conflict between political parties. I think this is really important for the voters to see which issues are maybe of relevance and which different perspectives you can have on that. I think, well, okay, quite some time ago, this worked better because you had the political parties were discussing in that. For quite some time now, we have this competition for the center of the population, which means that the parties are talking more and more in the same way, and the large one at least, and it's difficult then to see who is really representing me. On the other hand, I would say we should not limit our thought on democracy on participation in elections. And I think, for instance, it's interesting that many also smaller parties stood for elections now. On the one hand, I must say I would have expected a higher interest of the voters also because of that, which obviously didn't work out. But we can see that people, and also young people, are interested in doing something and changing something. So, I mean, I think there are some signs, or also when you think about the bigger movements like Fridays for Future or Extinction Rebellion or also Black Lives Matter, we have thousands of young people in the streets. So it might also be that for some people, elections are not really attractive because they think I cannot change anything in this way. And they rather want to have now, to turn it around, a voice than a vote. So really, I want to talk about my position and to stand to them and not to say, okay, this is like, I don't know, the lesser evil where I put my cross. So I mean, I share your assessment that we have a problematic situation here, and elections are obviously a core part of democracy, but I think we should not neglect what is going on all around that.
Many thanks. And the key word is now a frustration and also the feeling of not having the possibility to say anything, to be silenced. And here in Snezana, we come to the case of Serbia and the last parliamentary elections in June, where we also could see a broad election boycott of liberal democratic parties or this Zajedno coalition, which was highly diversified, polarized, but agreed in one point just to boycott the elections. So afterwards, we had all in all in Belgrade, it worked. In whole of Serbia, it didn't work, and the turnout, voters' turnout was about 49%. The elections are valid, and now we have the new old government again with the same prime minister, also put into this function by the president. And when we have all these experiences of the last months, Snezana, what could you say was the broad boycott in Serbia, election boycott, working, or was it just hindering liberal democratic parties to enter the parliament finally?
So we have very complex situation in Serbia because following the elections in the previous years, we have very low turnout of voters in all kinds of elections. In April, we have, as you said, 49% turnout. And I think that is actually the aftermath of many factors. One of that is low representation of other political actors in media, except the ruling party and government representatives. That is one of the key issue which is mentioned by the many civil society organizations, and now the latest European Commission progress report also reflects on it. OSCE mission that follows the election, and many other domestic and foreign organizations actually following the election conditions. Also, we have, I can say, the very divided citizens when it comes to politics. A large number of people in Serbia thinks that they actually cannot influence on anything which is in politics and in political life in Serbia, and actually they just withdraw for that public sphere. Actually, they are turned to their privacy and their personal lives. They actually don't see that they can do anything. Also, when we have that various pressures on the free and independent media, attacks on the journalists and the civil society organizations in public, there are various smearing campaigns in media, especially the tabloid media in Serbia, when the political opponents, journalists, independent media and organizations are marked as some kind of enemy or someone who is actually express interest of, I don't know, foreign countries and various negative connotation actually. And when it comes to the media presentation, that's actually the crucial topic that my organization is dedicated. We can see the high percentage of presentation of government, of public officials, and they are presented in a positive way. Opposing to that, we have the low presence of opposition or any other voices than the ruling parties and government are. And when it comes just to the pre-election reporting, we have, let's say, the better situation when it comes to the pre-election program as such. When you look at the part of the news program dedicated to the elections, then you have the balanced presentation of all election contestants. But when you look at the whole news program, you have dominantly presented the government and public officials actually, and you cannot actually make the difference between ruling party and the government. And that is one of the obstacle actually for the citizens to see what is going on in the society besides the politics and that publicly presented things. One of the key issues is officials campaigning, actually, and that is one of the recommendations for media to be better in that presentation of the political actors when they are actually presented as officials and when they are represented as party members. And at the other hand, we need actually to awaken the citizens somehow to participate more in public and political life. And I think that civil society organizations do and make some progress in that sense, explaining actually how can you participate in the public life from the local to the national level by entering debates on, I don't know, from the local budget to some kind of law or any policies presented by the state.
And Snezana, if I may ask you, what happened to the independent media? So if I may take the link, not the comparison, but the link to the 1990s, where you had flagship media, if I could say that, for example, B92, and also civil society movements. And you mentioned people have escaped, so it's an inner escape to privacy. How is it possible? Because you work with your institution not only on conducting public opinion, but also engaging, also as an NGO. How it is possible to engage people? Because at the moment in Serbia it does not look very optimistic, and also your institute also interpreted the election results as effect of brain drain and emigration. And your director, Zoran Gavrilović, is also offended and threatened just due to the result and summary, according to statistical data, that maybe election results would look another way if people would just stay there and not flee the country.
Okay. One of the actually key findings of the research from 2019, the last year, was the structure of the voters for the Progressive Party. And the result was that older and less educated people voted for Progressive Party, and that started some kind of smearing campaign against my colleague Gavrilović, and many SNS representatives actually was very negative, and I can say they were offended by the result that their voters are older and less educated people. And in relation with that brain drain you mentioned, we need actually to work with the younger and more educated people, because they are that group of people who are actually not participating, because I don't know, maybe they are too informed about all misuses of election procedures. They maybe are better informed about that how the institutions work or don't work and don't react on many wrongdoings. And in that terms, I think that people actually do not have faith to institutions to protect their interest and actually to make the states and officials to follow the regulations. And in years we are trying to to think what to do actually and how to awaken the public. But this is actually the process, and we still didn't find good way how to move things. And comparing to some previous election, we have lower turnout on these elections. For example, in 2017, 54% of voters voted at the elections for the president. Now we have that 49. So the situation is very complex, and I'm not sure what to say now.
So thank you. So the keyword, again, participation and voters turnout, and Marko Montenegro could be now taken as a good practice. It gives hope because first the voters turnout was really high, and about 70%, so much more than at the elections from 2016. And it is also a kind of a little government change, and new parties entered the parliament, succeeded the census. And Marko, if I may ask you, how was that possible? Because the Đukanović regime, if I may say, is in power since 1991 and appeared always to be very stable. And I suppose it was also in the region a great surprise.
Exactly. I mean, when it comes to the turnout percentage, we can say that the elections in August 2020, it was rated on 76%, which is higher, almost 6% than the previous elections that were held. In general, turnover in Montenegro is pretty high, but in this context of the parliament election 2020, it is really important to emphasize the new rule of on freedom of religion that was adopted by DPS majority in December 2020, when Montenegro has experienced a political turmoil since December till August 2020, especially because of the let's say the causes the consequences that were caused by the adoption of that law. So there were many huge protests and negative reactions by the Serbian Orthodox Church, which invited its members to vote against DPS. It influenced very much on the election results, and the coalition around Democratic Front have profited the most from the polarization caused by the law. So Montenegrin citizens have opted for change by giving majority to the opposition in the elections held on August 30, what ended one party rule in the country, which lasted for 30 years. So since the Montenegro is the first Western Balkan country where the long-lasting ruling party has been changed in a democratic way, can be concluded that the democracy has won. But we have to be aware of and we should emphasize that the situation is not white and black due to the euphoria, polarization of society, and the national symbols that are appearing in the streets and in general in public of Montenegro. Also, although the agreement between three new political majority parties is signed, a big part of international public is still wondering in which direction Montenegro is headed and what it means for European path and foreign policy priorities. However, the latest data that we presented in September 2020 showed that most of the Montenegrin society, most of the Montenegrin citizens believes that there will not be any change of state question of Montenegro, and that out of three persons have expectation that Montenegro will remain as independent country and also as NATO with membership in NATO. So we can say that also this was the first parliamentary election in Montenegro where the electoral lists were very well grouped. So the Serbian parties were around the coalition for the future of Montenegro, led by the Democratic Front, while DPS and outgoing governmental minority parties were divided into a couple of lists, but they were perceived as traditional allies of DPS, and the only political party that was excused from known electoral lists and has been perceived by the citizens differently is United Reform Action under Dritan Abazović, which prevailed. Will the opposition be a new ruling majority? So it can be concluded that most of the organizations and in general public is surprised by the results of the parliament elections held in August, but the key reason where we find is the law on religion and of freedom on freedom of religion in Montenegro that is adopted in December, and also in previous election processes, we had different liberal democratic parties or movements, but this time was a bit different with United Reform Action, because the main politician from the party is Albanian, is the politician that is declaring himself as Albanian, with the involvement of all ethnicities representatives on electoral list, with the main aim to strengthen fight against corruption and organized crime, nepotism and stability, leaving aside ethnicity question. So despite the very good result of the list, black and white, we have to be aware of the fact that the electoral results were influenced by strong engagement on the ground of the Serbian Orthodox Church, and that Montenegrin citizens are still in need of being aware of the political power and participation, since democracy requires citizens' participation for its functionality and legitimacy.
And you mentioned Dritan Abazović. Can he be seen as a role model? Because it's discussed that in each country there might be a Dritan who represents national minority without representing a national minority party, because in the region, in several countries, there are minority parties which do not have to pass the census, and they are part of the parliament and often also of the government, and also in Serbia. And what do you think, Marko and Snezana, is this the next step? So to have representatives of national minorities without being active in explicit national minority parties, but in liberal democratic parties, which are more focused on liberal democracy and not on national belonging.
Exactly, I think that I strongly believe exactly that that's the role how it should be followed by other countries in the Western Balkans, because Dritan is somebody who is declaring himself as Albanian, but all the time during the campaign he was focusing on the key questions that are related to the society, not related he was not focused on the things that are related to ethnicity. So I think that it was one of the key thing why he won four seats in the parliament, because it was expected that he can be from 2 to 4 seats in the parliament.
In Snezana, in Serbia, it's Rasim Ljajić, who is also a popular politician. And do you see possibilities in Serbia for a kind of a role model of Triton, so not being referred to the national belonging, but more to political programs?
I think that would be the fresh perspective, so to say, in Serbia, and I think that it work. And if we go back to the presidential elections in Serbia, we had more than 300,000 voters for Beli Preletačević as the new figure at the political scene. And I think that in Serbia, maybe it's more related to the new faces and new people. I don't think that higher participation will be related to that ethnicity and national thing. I think that people are actually tired of all the same people during the last, I don't know, almost 20 years. So I think that maybe some fresh ideas and fresh faces will be one of the motivators actually for the voters. And also I agree that I think that ideas that are not related to the ethnicity will work more than that some kind of national topics.
In Austria, Monika, we have kind of initiatives to form parties related to national and ethnic belonging, but at the moment it's not a real topic. But do you think, Monika, would that be a kind of backward development, because this obviously contradicts developments which are defined and understood as liberal democratic?
Yeah, of course, I would think that it would be a backwards development. Coming back to the first question, I would, for instance, also I would not think that it's a good idea to have a migrants party, let's say. Yeah? I mean, on the one hand, this is also stupid because there are many different migrants. I mean, you can make that as a form of protest or something like that to show that you are underrepresented. But I mean, also in general, it makes democracy very difficult when we have many crisscrossing lines of division, obviously. And the idea is that the divisions and the conflicts are political ones. So when we then have also ethnic ones or religious ones, whatever is there, representation gets very, very difficult. I mean, we also see that on the EU level, obviously. So it has become better over the decades, I think. But some time ago, somebody told me, when you are in the European Parliament, you will immediately recognize from which member state these MEPs come, but maybe not from which party. So and there you see, I think there you see the problem quite clearly if you have this kind of crisscrossing lines. So ideally, I would say we should have our conflicts, and it's good to have conflicts, but about political things and not about, I don't know, identities or something like that. And we talked also recently, we had also a discussion about this project with a representative from the small party Links. And then we agreed that, I mean, those parties who are now explicitly for including migrants so that they can vote, there is no guarantee that they will profit from that. I really think the migrant population is as far spread politically as the non-migrant population, and I think this is good news.
And another problem we could say is political apathy among young people, among youth. So when we take a look to Austria, according to citizenship, we have young voters or possible young voters, so divided, the youth divided in two groups. It was also the research and also there were also magazines, for example, showing a classroom and people, young people who are allowed to vote, who have the right to vote, could stand up, the others not. And we could see in Vienna that half of the pupils just were sitting. And this is, as we mentioned previously, this participation of voting is one aspect, but how to invite young people to participate, on the one hand, the citizenship is one factor, and the other factor is political disinterest. And I would say that political disinterest among young people is a problem which is a topic in whole Europe. So in Austria as well as in, I would say, in Serbia, Montenegro. And what concepts are useful, and what concepts do you use just invite young people to participate in which form, and also in and motivate them? So in Vienna, Monika, which because you have also this project, how do you invite young people? So if no vote, then voice. What is your program concretely to invite young people? Where do you see a possibility?
Well, first of all, in this project, I mean, we just invited people to talk with us in these rounds, but I mean, on the one hand, what I see is this exclusion of people, and it displays a psychological role, especially this setting that you mentioned in the classroom, and people are, also young people are talking about the elections, and it becomes very obvious that you are not allowed to vote, and you can be born in Austria and not be allowed to vote. So this is a form for a hardcore form of exclusion, I would say. And one could also see that in another way. I mean, there is so much talk, especially, maybe not, but also in Austria, about integration, seen as something that migrants have to do. But you have to give them the possibilities, you have to create the conditions. And I think the possibility to act politically, to be part of the political community is very important for that. So this is the one part. The other part, I mean, as I said before, but maybe I phrase it a bit differently. I see maybe a kind of polarization among young people. So I see young people who are very active politically, maybe not going to elections, but this is really a limited way of being political. As I said, Fridays for Future, the whole climate change thing, this is a very young movement, and Black Lives Matter and what have you. Also still refugees, asylum seekers. And on the other hand, those who not even go to elections. And maybe they even meet there. Both groups don't go to elections. The ones because they say I do something which is politically more meaningful, and the other ones because politics is, I don't know, a dirty business or something like that. So the problem is on the base of the political parties, I think, and how attractive they are, because on the other hand, we have to say, I mean, it is the low key, the easiest form of participation. We should not lose it. We should not lose elections. I'm quite sure about that. But I really think this has a lot to do with the performance of political parties and how people feel represented. And I guess something could be done here by having citizens' assemblies, by really having a more direct contact with the citizens, by really asking them, so that you have this elite citizen gap, which we see. I mean, we have researched for decades now in political science, and you have it everywhere. And so I think this is one part of that, how to reduce that at least.
And Marko, if I may ask you, FIFUDEM is very active in inviting different people in Montenegro, young people, also disabled people, and offering possibilities of participation. And how does that look like? What are your experiences and also results? Because you have a lot of activities, broad activities, and how is it also perceived in Montenegro?
Yes, but first of all, I would like to agree with Ms. MOKRE because youth are really polarized, I think, in general worldwide today, because most of them are super active and they are really engaged in different fields of the society, and other ones are like totally passive and they are not engaged at all. So what we do in our organization, we are mostly focused on the young people. If we comes to the programs that are related to civic and political participation. So we mostly cooperate with the universities and representatives of high school in order to combine formal and non-formal education in order to raise the awareness of the young people to be aware of their of the importance of political and civic participation through open and non-discriminatory processes in order to have informed and aware population who can participate in political processes, hold the state to account, to exercise rights and responsibilities effectively, aim for strengthening the quality of democratic governance and the nature of state society relations. We also do research that they are related to civic and political participation, and we during our activities, we promote prescribed and self-initiated tools or mechanisms of participation, which are given by the government or they are self-initiated by the NGOs. Let's say that in Montenegro, young people has to be more aware of their power, and that they should be led by willingness and motivation to have a better future in Montenegro, but most of them are unfortunately focused on the interests that they have, let's say, on the daily basis.
And in Serbia, Snezana, it also appears that young people are mostly focused on leaving the country and not engaging for the country.
Yes, unfortunately, Serbia is, I don't know, some kind of head of that brain drain. Actually, there are a lot of young and educated people leaving country due to unemployment, first of all. And I found the data from our media monitoring from our last monitoring in the elections. Only 2% of the topics politicians mentioned were youth and their problems. And CESI, the organization, also investigating elections in their research says that only 6% of the young people trust to the political party. And all the data actually show the situation that young people don't see themselves as some actor that can actually change or influence the politics, and also the politics doesn't recognize young and don't pay some attention and don't have activities related to the young people. And most of the youth in Serbia is unemployed and actually looking for ways how to improve their position, and that's at some point is leaving the country and finding job abroad, and they don't see participation as the way or the tool how they can actually impact on their life and their current situation. And some organizations they do have the programs actually how to increase young people participations by educating them how actually to vote, to inform them about election procedures and what are the ways actually how you can participate and influence from the local topics and the local policies, how to actually be heard by local governments and how to actually influence some policies brought by the country. But I think that's the field that should be developed, and I think that we have a lot of work to do in that field.
Yes, that is the main conclusions. Snezana, thank you, and thank you, Monika and Marko. These are the main conclusions that we all have a lot to do. The IDM Democracy Talks have started now with the first edition on participation and representation. We could see that participation is not only, of course, going to votes, but in a broader sense meant and necessary also to live participation, and at the same time also representation, having in mind that young people, also people not from the mainstream, have also to be represented by policies and in the long run by politics. And all in all, there is a lot to do for us all. And many thanks to you all for joining us and sharing your expertise and your visions for strengthening liberal democracy. Please join us in the future, also on social media. It's the first edition. And again, many thanks to Monika, many thanks to Snezana, and many thanks to Marko for inspiring input and your expertise, and looking forward to continue.